Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Better Opinion, our third attempt at doing this as well as we can, considering how janky it is. I am Kevin. This is my co-host, Manser. Manser, how's it going, bud?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Another week.
Yeah,
I'm still alive. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
yeah, that's what's happening.
Yes, it is what's happening. So, as always, we're here because you have something you want to talk about. So what is it? What are we talking about today?
Well, I thought we were talking about some specific ideas earlier about how things are perceived in society. But I've always been thinking about when thinking about social media is how will people see it in 50 years? This era that we're in. Like the introduction of Twitter, how it seems like everyone knows what's happening across the globe. It's not as you don't have as many people who are like specialized who know what's happening in like Israel or something. It's on Twitter and people see it and
Like,
have
yeah,
an
like we
opinion.
live in an era where you can quite literally be talking to the guy you could reply to a tweet from the guy you just shot at.
Yeah. It's like in the Israel-Russia war, you can see like what's happening as they are at war.
You mean,
It's
yeah, like the Ukraine.
Ukraine and
And Ukraine, Israel, whatever, China's threatening the islands and
you can actually they even have video
video
proof.
of it. Yeah, like you can literally watch it. Like Live Leak has never been more popular.
Yeah. So it's like if a leader of a country tries to say it's not that bad, you can see like the
How
victim
bad it really is.
the victim like saying, yeah, this is what happened to me, my family has died. Is like
You see video. Yeah, I remember when the Ukraine war started, you could almost daily find new footage of just like shellings of a major city, people just in their apartment with their kids. Suddenly, raid sirens going off, they're hunkering down because, Russia's shelling the city because
yeah.
children are a danger. So, before we get into it, it's funny that we talked about this because I was just earlier today, I had watched a video. Did you know that just shy of 600,000 Russian troops are either dead or like very gravely wounded?
No.
Yeah, they have against a smaller country. I mean, I get it that they've received a lot of our supplies and that's made a difference, but against a smaller country, they have bungled this so bad that they have lost more than 500,000, or at least had severely disabled 500,000 people. That's an insane number
Yeah.
when you're supposed to be the superior force. I could say a lot about all of this, but what I think is what I think is sort of the core of your question. When we look at history, it's viewed very much in like isolation. We've had major world wars, and
Yep.
there have been major wars between major empires. The Ottomans, the Byzantines, the Crusades. I mean, funnily enough, the majority of the damage a crusade ever does is to its own land. They never quite make it to the enemy before pillaging a bunch of their own villages. But the if you think about it, these are all quite isolated, right?
They all happen when they're right in front of each other. But
Yeah. You think about, before it was the United Kingdom, you just think about essentially a bunch of tribes, because that's what they were, right? It was British tribes versus Irish tribes versus Scottish tribes, and even once they were kingdoms, they were fighting their neighbors, and you even see that in like China. There's so much writings about the Warring States period, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it's because people love making Dynasty Warriors. They love making video games about it.
do you feel that when war has become more long range, that has expanded a bit? Like when we started becoming more nuclear, we had more drone strikes, people could go overseas. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it, things are super isolated. You look at references to like old Chinese battle or old Japanese battlefields, and it's like two armies just literally sat like a football field apart and then decided time to fight and ran at each other. And now you just got to feel dead guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they just decide which one won by who has the most people left.
And people used to watch those.
Yeah, they'd literally sit and watch up on a hill because that's what it was. It was just like it wasn't huge. It was big, but it was a couple thousand, people. It's not nowadays where you're shelling a city or whatever. So it's scaled up, and I think that reach does play a role in it. So why am I saying all this though, right? Because you think about this kind of stuff. It's that when we look at stuff now, it's utterly different, as you described. You can literally watch live updates. We're in a situation now where instead of it being like you read a newspaper that something is happening on the other side of the world, or you read about a war in the Middle East, or even if we're participating, it's still very far away. Now, you're gonna have if you meet up for family dinner, unless you are all of one mind, you're about to have an argument about Israel versus Palestine. Well, really, it's Israel versus everyone around them, or Russia versus Ukraine, or whether China has a right to Taiwan. You're going to have these as if they're things that are happening in your own country. And you run into that all the time. I mean, I think the Canadians I know have more opinions about American politics than about their own politics. Now, I know that's our neighbor, but I don't think even 15 years ago people gave a shit in America about the Prime Minister of Canada.
I don't think they knew who it was.
And now all you ever do is hear about how Trudeau is a woke something and ruining the country, and it's very strange.
I think what's interesting is it's made people more stressed, because you've talked about this before. It's like people are going on the internet, not really in this vein, but more in terms of like fake, like just facts, but people are also ingesting more information than they're used to, and a lot of it is real, not very nice information. So now it's like you hear all these people saying, oh, everything's gone to hell,
and it's not. It hasn't gone to hell. It's like it's always been this bad.
It's always been this bad, but people didn't know.
Actually, if you were to look at actual data about the quality of life for the average person in the world, and just look at things like crime rates, standards of living, crime rates, death rates, disease rates, everything. You compile all the different sort of pointers you'd consider to be standards for quality of life. It is the best that it's been throughout history. And while it may not be the best, remember, I think I talked about this in the past. I talk about change your perspective, zoom out. I think if you look at it really tightly, it's probably worse right now than it was 3 months ago, but then if you zoom out, it's a graph, right? So if you look at it really small, it's we're down here and it's doing this. But if you look at it really, really, really big, you'll realize we're still up here from down here from 20, 30 years ago. You know what I mean?
But I think part of it is that social media has a more of an impact on your likelihood to live now than ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I'm specifically talking about COVID.
Sure.
Because the political ideology has made it so that a lot of people had just chosen not to have vaccines, not really for great reasons. I think you told me this before, that in fact, at first, the Democrats didn't like the idea of the vaccines. Then it swapped.
Yeah, it was Operation Lightspeed, I think is what it was called, or Warp Speed. It was Trump's program. And I remember I was at the office, and everyone stopped, and someone put up on their screen, everyone in our section of the office, watched him give an address about it. And then this woman comes on, and it's total propaganda. She's sitting there going, using the power of the private sector. We'll utilize the private sector. They keep saying that because what it really is Trump wants to give all of his rich buddies a chance to make money off of this thing. And so we're utilizing the power of the private sector. And I remember I scoffed at it. And the conservatives in the office around me all looked at me because they knew that I was, not. In their eyes, I'm a liberal. In the liberals' eyes, I'm a conservative. Depends on who you talk to. But they all knew that I wasn't on their team, and so they looked at me. They gave me a dirty look because they knew why I was scoffing. And lo and behold, a year later, they were the ones that were saying the vaccine is bad, COVID's a hoax. But when I was going, this seems a little bit conniving. This seems like a money grab. That's when no, Trump's king. Trump perfect. And so, yeah, that definitely happened. And people just forget it. I actually had an argument with someone just a couple days ago about this very issue where it was like, you are blaming the Democrats for something the Republicans started, and we've just forgotten that that happened.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting what they will talk about 50 years in the future. That might be part of it. How people just
Switch sides.
switch
Yeah.
sides, and don't even notice that they did it.
Yeah, they don't. That's the big thing. They don't notice that their opinion has changed. It'll be interesting. It's hard for me to predict exactly how people will write about it.
Well, again, I'm not asking. This is a thought experiment.
Yeah, no. I get you. It's just, I think it can be really hard to consider what it is that people are going to write about it, because it is such an unprecedented time compared to pretty much all of history. The dissemination of information is, we're in an era where propaganda has both the potential to be completely useless and very powerful.
Yeah.
Based on who you're talking to, because it used to be most people could get influenced by propaganda because there was really only a couple sources of information, and you were really isolated to whatever local source you had.
Yeah.
People had word of mouth, the newspaper, maybe the radio, and, their local preacher, and maybe their local politician.
Yeah.
And those are only if those politicians were particularly publicly involved, right?
Yeah.
So people were heavily swayed by their religious leaders because the religious leaders' politics were their politics.
Yeah.
And they were heavily influenced by the people they were around because they had no other really way to collect information.
But so what I'm getting from this is the older generation is much easier to influence. But
Don't tell them that. They'll get upset.
I'll be very frank. Depending on who you talk to, maybe yes or maybe no. But I think most of the scientists who are older are harder to sway.
Sure. I think the study of the sciences, regardless of which one,
Yeah, it makes you cynical by nature.
it makes you questioning by nature. Everything's a theory. Everything requires a lot of evidence before you get to make a claim.
But I'm kind of interested to see if this more cynical view will be, I think it'll be both good and bad, but I want to see what happens in like a few decades.
Yeah, it will be interesting. When I think about it, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the current, right now Zoomers are getting jobs.
Yeah.
Right. They're millennials are your middle managers now, and Zoomers are your line employees. 10 years ago, millennials were the line employees, and Zoomers were kids. It'll be interesting to see what happens in 10, 20 years when the generation after Zoomers starts becoming line employees, right? And so now you're in a world where the boomers are mostly phased out.
Yeah.
Right. Boomers and Gen Xers, people forget a lot about Gen X, but they're there, they're quite a variety because they're very much a middle group. I think that what's most interesting about the way social media affects people's view of the facts is everything. Like, whenever I argue it's so hard to talk with someone because everybody wants hard evidence for everything but has no hard evidence. They just they said a guy, or they'll be like, I watched a video. Yeah, whatever, it's YouTube. 90% of what's on YouTube is just some shit someone made up and they were just trying to make it so that you'll watch.
A lot of it is just AI generated shit.
These days it is. Yeah. It is a lot of, not to deviate too much, I think AI is interesting because I think we're going to see a lot of AI take over everything. And everyone's like, oh, because I watched Devin Nash talk about this for a minute. He said, I think in 10 years, there's not going to be any jobs because AI is going to do 90% of everything. I think to some degree that's true. But what we're going to find is that AI, when I look at what AI does, even if it becomes really, really good, there's going to become a demand for things that are not AI because I don't get the sense that, at least for a very long time, AI is going to be able to make something that you can tell that's not what it is.
Well, I think what the problem is, I've learned this recently, is that if you have an AI model start learning over time, it starts to cannibalize itself. So you probably, I don't know how they'll fix that. They might have to keep making new AI models or.
We want to know what I think is the ideal way to. I'm going to give everyone a hint, and go do this. You'll make $1 billion. people need to stop using AI models that already know things. Instead, you take it fresh and then you
teach
make a ton of your own content and you teach it exclusively off of your own resources. So like if I was a company that wanted to have an AI that could make artwork, I would first make a ton of exclusively my own artwork, just an insane amount, and then feed it all to the AI. And then it will know nothing except what I do. And not only will I own 100% of what it makes, there's no issue with copyright, but it'll know how to do exactly what I want.
Yeah, I've thought about that too. Is like using AI art to kind of follow, well, AI anything to follow my design. Is like, hey, I want hand. I don't feel like doing it again. It's like, and then maybe I'll make some tweaks on top of it.
I think it is possible that AI could be intelligent enough one day to do things that are exceptionally good compared to now. But I don't think what I think will happen is that we will reach a point where there's a beauty in imperfection. That's what I actually think.
I still think that's true.
Well, I think that that's true now, but I think people don't realize it. You know, they're not craving it.
I think companies don't realize it. I think
Companies are stupid.
and most of the people just who don't really do art, I don't think understand it as much.
Yeah, well, you know, so I'll say this, and when I say companies are stupid, I want to be clear. That's not like an anti-capitalist statement. That's like I've worked at companies, and you know how they say individuals are smart, people are stupid? Extrapolate that, right? I know a ton of really smart people at companies, and then the company makes terrible, awful decisions, and they back it because all of the incentives and motivators at a company means you constantly make the worst possible decision because you think it's going to be good.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen a lot.
But let's go back.
Yeah, not to derail too much. I think that's going to be a part of it, right? I think that when we talk about social media and we talk about AI, the reason I brought up AI is because I think that AI is going to create an environment where there's a lot of bullshit just constantly spread out. You don't know what's real and what's not. We're already there to some degree. And then over time, it's going to get really good. It's going to dominate. And then people are going to notice that it is dominating. And it's kind of like AI art. People pump out a ton of it. And there's and ignoring completely like people's social opinions. Because I know when you talk about AI art, that's like a huge like social media, everyone shits their pants, and I totally get why, right? But sometimes it's irrational, you know what I mean? Like there's no room for even discussion.
I think the problem with it is that a lot of companies are trying to shortchange a lot of companies are already trying to shortchange creatives.
Yes, of
which
course.
is what this AI art is kind of. I think it could be useful to artists. I don't think companies are going to use it well. I think that's the problem, is that people are selling this to companies when they should be selling this to artists to help them on their workflow.
Yeah, because I think that if you could, again, I didn't get to finish making my point, but I agree with you. I think that if you are making a piece and you're trying to like concept draft, it can be really useful for that.
Yeah.
But what I think, you know, what I see is it's like you can make some pretty cool stuff, and people have gotten really good at making stuff that's like almost looks like someone else made it, right? It actually drew it. But at the end of the day, there's still just a desire. It's like, I want this guy's artwork. I can give you an example. You can't commission him. There's this guy named JK, J.K. on Twitter. All of his characters, I call them, they all have crazy bitch eyes. I love it. I love when he does a character. And he doesn't do commissions. He's too popular. I would pay that guy just to do like one of my, you know, D&D characters in his art style. I love it. And it's like, you could get an AI to almost duplicate him, and it still just wouldn't be the same as if he did it. There's something there that is unique to the person that cannot be duplicated.
Yeah.
And people don't notice it as much yet because there's still so much human-made stuff. But as you get flooded by AI-generated anything, you're going to reach a point where you desire. It's that, like, right now you don't crave it, but eventually you will crave that the beauty and the imperfection, right? That thing, that undescribable thing that the AI can't duplicate. And that goes back to what I was saying about social media, is that we're in an age that I think is going to be interesting to talk about in the history books, because we're at the cusp of that, right? We're sort of in a transitional period in the way we consume information, the way information is presented, the way information is compiled. Things are AI generated, AI created voiceovers and scripts and all this kind of stuff. And then we're disseminating all this information that is not fact checked. You know, I've had so many arguments with people about like the issue in Springfield, right, with the Haitian immigrants.
Oh yeah.
And the more you consume that, the more the conversation becomes. It's like, even if I were to grant the person every criticism they have about people eating pets or something, the more you look at it, it's like, well, if that is happening, there's a reason that's happening that isn't just immigration. Because then you start to find out, well, actually, they didn't just take 20,000 people and dump them there. This is smaller groups, some of which have been there for 10 plus years, being put there over time. So what's creating this result? What is it that's actually happening? And you can't even ask that question, because the second you do, oh, so then you've been convinced by the left that nothing's happening, right? And if you do question, if you go, well, maybe there is something here, maybe we should look at it more deeply to figure out what the cause is, because clearly it's not that uncomplicated. Oh, so you're just racist. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening.
Yeah. I think a good way to look at like this behavior is at flat earthers who accidentally prove constantly that the earth is round, but it's like something was off. It's like, hey, it's like this experiment will finally prove the earth is flat.
This one will do it for sure.
And then it's like, oh, that's crazy. It's saying the earth is round on this result.
So it just can't be right. Yeah, that is a good way of pointing at it. What I think it is that people are too emotional about a lot of these topics. So as they, because it's like when you ask a question, to give you just before you go off, like to make an example is, I often get asked a question, right, by like family, for example. This happened just the other weekend when I was talking with my parents. You know, how do you feel about blank? And then I go, that's a complicated question, because I think depending on what aspect of that question you ask about, I'm going to have a different answer. Yeah. Right? But it's so closely related to politics and what they think the problem is and all the misinformation. You know, if you say misinformation, that's political. And it's like, no, there is information out there that is just wrong, either on purpose or by accident. I mean, J.D. Vance literally admitted that he just makes shit up to rile people up online. He said it in an interview. It's just real, you know? People say crazy stuff about, people who like Elon Musk just ignore the fact that he's been in a financial crisis ever since he's been having to pay off Twitter, which is just true. He put himself in his own financial situation with the way that he's paid himself in stock and then loaned that stock to the bank to get a loan to pay himself so he doesn't have to pay taxes. There's a whole scheme, and it's bit him in the ass, and everyone goes, no, he's perfect, And whether you like him or not, that's not the point. Maybe I'm even somewhat wrong. Maybe he's recovered from that already. I haven't looked. But the point is that all of those topics, whoever you're talking to is going to be so influenced by their emotional investment in what they think the alignment of that thing. It kind of goes back to sort of the conversation we had in the last episode.
The woke versus.
Yeah. It's like there's so much investment that you can't even begin to have a back and forth to figure out like what's the logical thing that's going on here.
I think it's also important to dissect what that emotion is that you may want something to be true or not true, so you don't pay much attention to the details. You kind of add it to your backlog of references as like, hey, look at all these true things that I have in my deck of cards.
And they look for things where they don't even exist, just because they're looking for more things to add to the woke or the chud folder. You know what I mean? And I think you're right about that. But so when you think about how are people going to look at social media 50 years from now, I don't know what it'll look like in 10 years, because who knows if we're going to put some reins on it, maybe, because you look at, I think, actually a good example is I was talking with someone about this the other day, was when you look at the internet 10, 20 years ago, I mean, it was the Wild West, you know, and a lot of the way the internet culture works now came from like a few sites like Something Awful or 4chan. Most memes are derivatives of things that spawned on Something Awful or 4chan, and people don't even know that that's what people are using. Memes that started on the poll board, and it's progressives using them to make a progressive joke. They don't even know where the origin of this stuff is.
I think the idea of putting reins on like comments on the internet is very interesting because it could potentially be very dangerous.
Oh yeah.
It's like one of the things that scared me a lot was when I think Biden who proposed Facebook or Twitter take control of what facts are, which was very scary to me because you do not want a company like Twitter or Facebook who has these things that they want to happen true to like control what is true or not on their site.
Because so like, because it's an interesting sort of problem to solve, because anytime you assign one group to be in charge of something, whatever it is, right, there's a chance for negative influence. Because if you make the government in charge of what's real, well, the government's been lying to people for all of history. So how can you make them in charge? The only real way to not guarantee, but heavily create a likely result of a lack of corruption is when you create a third party group who has absolutely zero connection to the rest, whose sole function is to do a thing and to do it right, and to do it through a certain group of standards that we all agree on. They are not allowed to change their own standards, but you have to like make it so like politicians and outside sources also don't get to like make that, you know, make those changes either, right? Like a good example is like the ATF, right? So it's a government department. This is a good example of why when it's a problem, right? So the ATF, because you can't let them make their own rules, right? And this is what I mean. So I shouldn't have said it's a good example. A good example of when this fails is the ATF, is that they are supposed to be an independent sort of law enforcement body that regulates gun, tobacco, and firearms. What they actually do is just constantly make shit up and then try to enforce it. They're not allowed to make laws, but they just make up what they call rules and then enforce them like they're laws. And nobody stops them. So you have now what is essentially a rogue agency who tells you something is illegal. It has not been made into a law, but they've made a rule, and that's their rule now. And then they track down everyone who has it, and then they show up at your house with a gun. And if you don't predict their arrival and react exactly how they want, they kill you, and then they get away with it. And then Congress like yells at them, and then nothing happens, you know. So the ATF gets to murder a man, and everyone just goes, "Well, he shouldn't have broke the law." Well, he didn't actually. He broke the rules.
Yeah, Twitter actually has another group like this. I've read about it a long time ago. They go on and anything horrific like torture or stuff that someone puts up on the site is like they go through kind of like filter. They make sure it doesn't make it to people's eyes. Now they've been treated horribly, so like there's been issues with that, but I won't go into that. But there is like some filtering done on Twitter and Facebook along those lines, but not really for fact checking, but more this definitely shouldn't be on here. It's like we do not want this on our site.
Oh, and it makes it really difficult. I think to some degree you're never going to be fully free of other people's control. But my example with like the ATF, right, was that they've been allowed to just do their own thing, and they get to make their own rules and then enforce their own rules. And so then people with an agenda, whatever that is, the incentives that are there allow them to do stuff. So the only way that you could have like an independent fact checking agency is if their KPIs and their ways of getting money and their forms of measurement were neither set by them nor incentivized to get one result over the other. That's hard to do. I'm sure there's probably a way, but it's hard to do. And that's the same issue that you run into with what you talked about, like a company regulating itself, is what is the incentive, right? Well, the incentive on, say, Twitter, right, is like, well, we don't want this shocking stuff on there because we're a for-profit organization and we need to make sure people want to use the platform.
We need to make sure that we have ads.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's always about incentives. What's the incentive to do something? Like with disinformation, misinformation, whatever, what's the incentive? Well, the incentive is the thing you talked about, filling my folder, packing the box for my side.
My MTG deck is like of cancel. Is my blue deck.
Yeah, my blue deck. I got to counterspell your argument with a, you know, well, actually, pronouns in bio, right, or whatever you use, right. So I think that to bring it back to like what it's going to look like, you know, I do think that when I say even like, I don't want to use the term regulating or whatever, but when I mentioned, you know, putting a sort of the reins on something, sometimes putting the reins on stuff is social. There are certain things that just happen because we as a society kind of like come to filter it out because it's just not good for us.
Yep.
And it's not that we just like agreed on it. It's that I think that most people, you know, most people on average are not stupid.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not the smartest person in the world, but they're not stupid.
It's
And-
like they know how to live.
yeah, and they want good things and not bad things.
Yeah.
And it's why oftentimes when you start to challenge good-natured people on the things they believe by just getting them to talk about it and then, you know, politely pointing out like, oh, but what about this? They start to like go, okay, maybe I'm you see that with these interviews,
I
right?
think-
with
I
like
think-
voters.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems is a lot of these people who have opinions that are against yours, they're probably not really thinking about the issues you're thinking of. And if given a chance to actually speak to them honestly, they might give you a bone.
Well, a good example is like you see an interview with these Trump voters and like, so do you think it needs to be that America should be a Christian nation? At first they're like, yeah, it should be. And then they go, well, what about like Jews? Like I'm Jewish. Am I not allowed to practice? And then they go, well, I didn't mean it like that.
It's
right?
like, yeah.
And you don't even have to attack them more. You go like, if you're nice to them and you're like, no, I'm just asking.
It's like,
I keep hitting the microphone.
because they're not by their actual nature, they're not mean people. They kind of follow this mob mentality. They're not because like it's not their job to think about these things.
Right.
It's
Well, it's not a concern to their day-to-day life.
Yeah. It's just a thing that they do. Like, hey, like me and my family do this. It's like people going to a sports game. It's
Sure.
like I'm rooting for the Steelers. It's like, you guys suck. It's like they don't. If they were to like sit down and like talk to like the enemy's like
The other
quarterback
team,
or whatever,
right.
I'm sure they'd have like a nice conversation. But in the stands, they're like rooting for their teams. Like it feels like it's kind of that mentality.
It is, and it goes back to what you said before, which was repeating what I said before, which is I just don't think a lot of people were as invested in the internet 5-6 years ago as they are now. Everyone is on their cell phone. I looked around for my cell phone. Could be like, you know, your cell phone. They're attached to the social media all the time.
Yeah.
You know.
guys know what a cell phone looks like, right? You guys have phones.
You guys have phones, right? But I think that whenever you talk to someone and you give them a chance to really talk about their beliefs, and then you don't poke holes in it as an attack, you just ask challenging but polite questions, quickly you start to realize that they're not as extreme as you thought. They're mostly emotionally driven.
Yeah.
And now that they're going, oh, actually I don't like that, their emotions
Again, it's not
change.
because they're stupid. It's just
or that they're evil. They're not stupid or evil.
they just haven't thought about it.
They haven't thought about it, or they haven't experienced a situation that challenges that perspective, you know?
They haven't seen the consequences of what they're asking.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, it's like you see people online and they're so fervently against trans people, you know? And then I go, well, how many trans people do you know? Right? And they'll
Probably.
say that they know them, but then when you ask, like, can you introduce me? They can't.
It's 'cause-
You know, they've watched videos. They've seen a stereotype. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something. This is going to really upset some people. There are some trans people out there that are really annoying and I don't want to be around them.
Well, that's
Luckily,
true for
I don't
all,
have to be. And that's true, as you were about to say.
For all people.
For all people. I know some straight people, some gay people, some white people, some black people, some Asians that I don't like. And, it's because they're people. And some people suck. And statistically, you're going to meet them. And sometimes they're going to be of certain demographics.
Yeah.
But it's not because of that thing that they're that way. So you go online and you only watch videos titled insane trans person, and you're going to believe that every trans person is a lunatic. But I've worked with plenty of trans people, gay people, people of color, whatever. And you know what? Man, they just show up. They want to work. They want to go home. They really don't want to be there. They're going to eat their lunch. They maybe like sports or video games.
Yeah.
They watched an anime recently. They're not really that much different because of course not.
They're not interested in bothering you as much as you think they do.
Yeah, I'm sure if we got into a topic that was sensitive, we might end up arguing, but that's true of anyone. You just have to, but it's just going to be different. What each person is sensitive or strongly opinionated about is going to be different based on each person.
And you might learn something, or they might learn something. Who knows?
Sure. Yeah, I actually remember when I walked on two people having an argument about billionaires at work one time, and one person's opinion was it's an insane amount of wealth that they're never going to need that's hoarded, and the other person was, yeah, but it's something that they earned, like it is their wealth. And ignoring arguing the idea of like exploitation is the only way to reach billions, like let's just say that this was a billionaire who was absolutely fair in every way possible, and earned their
worked
billions.
hard.
Everyone in their company is fairly compensated. They earned their money absolutely fairly. Let's say that's true. I think both sides are a valid statement in that regard. And then I said, well, I think the thing that's being expressed here is that it is reasonable for someone to keep what they have earned and experience the rewards of that. But it is mathematically not good for society when wealth is hoarded.
Yeah.
And when you reach a exponential amount of wealth where you will never use all this money, you have no use for it, that is when it becomes a problem, and maybe we should be doing something about that. Maybe it shouldn't be okay to just have $500 billion in the bank and never touch it.
I think that's an interesting aside, because when you become very wealthy, you get to pay to not take part in society.
Yeah. And so, when I said that to them, they both were like, that's a valid point. I don't really know what the solution is, but that makes sense. And even the guy who was like heavily defending it, because I met him at his level. I agreed. Yeah, no, I mean, it is their, like, they've earned it, and I understand the reason you defend that, but here's why it's a problem, and maybe we need a solution. And maybe if they're a good person, the billionaire would go, that's a good point. I really don't need $500 billion. I have no use for it. And if you have those kinds of conversations, you realize that both of these people sat super opposed. And then they were like, that's a good point. And they didn't even get mad at each other. They were just having a debate. It got a little heated. I made a good point. And then they were both like, that's good, yeah. And then I saw them talking again in the future. What's my point I'm making here? One of these people was like a trans woman, and the other person was like a really conservative dude.
And they started...
And they continued to have friendly interactions.
Yeah.
And so whenever we start to think that like there's a villain, whenever we look at anyone or any opinion as if they are there's just a strong opponent, chances are it's not really that strong of an opponent. It's that emotional investment.
That's kind of why I don't like the classic Disney villains, like, twirly mustache. I like the more he has a point. It's like perhaps he is right in some aspect and I am wrong. It's like this. I like the way Star Trek does it. It's never there was a correct way to do this. It's like, as the viewer, what did you think of what happened?
The reason I think that I agree, I would agree with you. Well, there's two things. I don't agree with you in that sometimes I do wish that villains were just evil so I could feel good killing them.
Well, that's just a personal thing.
Yeah, that's a personal thing. But I think that the only problem with that from sort of like a societal certain, like, just current situation standpoint, is that when you look at how uncritical people are,
Yeah.
people struggle to even have meaningful discussions on that topic.
Well, I think that's the problem. I think that's kind of maybe one of the like the walls people talk about in terms of evolution. We need to get over that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and also people aren't very good at writing those things because, like, look at Thanos in the fucking Marvel verse, right? People were like, dude, Thanos did nothing wrong, he was right. And I was like, how is he right? When you have infinite power, how is half the galaxy genocide your only solution? You have infinite power. You can change reality to suit your needs.
I think that's kind of a problem with Marvel writing in general. It's like Scorsese. I think was it Scorsese who said that the Marvel movies are roller coasters, not cinema.
I heard that quote. I don't remember who said it, but I'll believe you.
And I'm kind of with him on that. As like I personally didn't like it because I couldn't get into the characters and all that stuff, but that's a me problem. It's like if you enjoy Marvel, that's good for you.
Yeah, you're allowed to enjoy it. I used to like Marvel. I got burnt out on it because it was the same thing. Everyone's Tony Stark now. Yeah. All the characters are just Tony Stark. One thing I will say is I heard one argument about why Thanos did that and why he's actually a good villain, and it wasn't because he was right. It was, yeah, he's insane. So he had the wrong answer to the problem. He had the right problem that needed solving. He wanted to solve the problem. He was, it's hard to say this, morally in the right from his perspective because his goal was in his mind to do good through evil, right? But because he is a lunatic, he failed to grasp that with infinite power comes infinite better solutions. And he chose like the dumbest one. Yeah. And that's because he's an idiot. And that's why he was wrong.
He is the Mad Titan.
He's the Mad Titan.
I don't know if they express that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
They don't. They don't express that really. I mean, they call him that, but like it's like a one-off, so you can soy pod.
Well, in the comics, he's in love with death, so that's
a different. Well, yeah, because in the comic books, he's just bad. There's just nothing. There's not even going like, oh, at his core, he wants to do something good. It's like, no, in the comic books, he is so evil that he wants to cause galaxy-wide genocide so that he can have sex with the concept of death. That's it.
And he lost to Deadpool because Deadpool is also...
Because Deadpool is always the winner. That's why. It's because Deadpool is the ultimate foil of whatever plot point you're writing in a story.
Well, and then Thanos made him immortal.
Well, he kind of already was, so
he
whatever.
Kind of already was.
Anyway, the point is that, I think that going back to that issue of people not really understanding even their own investment in something is that a lot of what goes on in social media is an emotional reaction that isn't very deep. And most people are almost entertained. They're filled with fervor. And fervor, I talk about this when I talk about problems. So this is a little bit of an aside, because that's all this show is asides. But it's a little bit of an aside when we talk about, like, when you're upset about something. Like, let's say you are going to work and you hate your job, and your boss is an asshole. There are really two ways of expressing that negative. You can get really sad or you can get really mad. And the thing about sadness is sadness is very debilitating. It's a debilitating emotion.
Yeah.
It makes you stop what you're doing. It can make you feel hopeless. It can make you not take care of yourself, not do anything you need to do. And while anger is not necessarily a good emotion, it is a motivating one.
Yeah.
When you're mad, you will feel motivated to do something. And if you channel it correctly, you can be motivated to do something that'll solve your problem in a good way. You can channel it to solve things in a bad way or not solve it or make it worse. But sadness will inevitably make you do nothing. And so if you are needing to express a negative emotion, if you are filled with negativity and need to let it out, I always encourage people that it's better to be angry than sad because that is very motivating. So what ends up happening is people, anger can be very addictive because, like I said, it's motivating. It gets your adrenaline pumping. It gets your blood flowing. It's a very strong emotion. And if you're not used to feeling elated, you will be new to a high emotion. This is a high negative emotion rather than a high positive emotion, but it is a form of elation of its own. It is very, it pumps you up.
Yeah.
And if you become addicted to that, you go seeking things that make you angry so that you can get high off of being angry.
Social media is like today's gladiator fights.
It absolutely is like today's gladiator fights. But instead of watching two greasy men attempt to kill each other homoerotically, you instead watch two greasy men argue via text format, and they're
Homoerotically.
Homoerotically, yeah. And but they're not. You're not watching two people fight anymore. You're watching two profiles. You're watching an anime profile picture and a picture of a cat in sunglasses named Cat Turd call each other, names and saying you're dumb, right? And Elon Musk replying, looking into this. That's one of my favorite memes. It is one of my favorite memes because it's true. Is someone just says the most insane shit, like breaking news. Obama is sending 3,000 immigrants across the border to vaccinate our kids. And then Elon Musk replies, looking into this, 3 exclamation points. Big if true. And it's like, homie, you are the owner of this social media platform. I feel like you should be able to easily recognize that is distinctly made up. Concerning. And so now you see people, they actually, like, I've seen him do that.
Oh shit, is that Obama?
Like I've seen him do that. Like that's a real thing. So then when people make like fake versions of that, it's so funny because it feels like it could just be real. It feels like it could just be real. It's really funny. So yeah, I going back to the very beginning, I don't know how it's going to be viewed, but I think it's going to be a very unique point in time compared to any other time in history.
I want to see like children in the future have to write a presentation on Trump's speeches. I think that will be the
How would that even look when they say, and then he said, Obama?
It's like the teacher criticizing, no, you spelled this correctly. It's like, this is too coherent. I don't think he really read.
I don't think he had, yeah, it's like, I don't think he really wrote this. No, I got this. This is from a real source. No, this is far too coherent. These words are all spelled right. He hasn't screwed up anyone's name.
It's like, yeah.
This can't be real. I think this is AI
He
generated.
got the person's race correct.
That's not a real speech that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even Mike's over here cracking up about it.
Yeah. Just
yeah, it'll be a time.
Yeah.
To say the least, it'll be a time.
It will be very funny.
Yeah, I hope we find the key to keeping me alive long enough. Just me, I don't care about anyone else, but keeping me alive long enough to see what happens, because it'll be quite funny. How will they describe the debate between Joseph the Biden and Trump Kamabla,
The PhD research paper.
Donald Kamabla Trump, on what that looked like? What would a paper about that conversation look like?
Yeah.
And then he said, I can golf better than you any day. No, I'm the best golfer. I have all the best golfs.
It's like, was this real or
Was
AI
this real? Did
generated?
this conversation really happen?
It's like, surprisingly, this coherent sentence was AI generated.
What's surprisingly funny too is, like, I remember when I was reading about how Trump called Kamala Kamabla, and I was like, what is that? Like, that was my first reaction. It wasn't even making fun of Trump. I was literally like, I don't understand. Like, I understand Sleepy Joe.
It's like a lot of people. It was
But
like,
and then people were replying. They were going, lol, Kamabla, he's such a troll master. And I'm like, how is that trolling?
he said Kofefe once, and everyone was like, "What is he? What is that?"
Oh, there's literally like a VTuber whose name is just Kafifi.
It's like,
That's the thing though, is like, sometimes people like react to the stuff he says and they're like, lol, it's so funny, he's a genius. And I'm like, I still don't understand what that means. Like, all you did was, like, I understand why Obama was funny. It sounded funny,
Yeah.
right? Like, I understand, but that's not funny because nobody is
It's
quoting him.
Like lol troll. He
Like,
said
yeah,
Obama.
they're making fun of him. I don't understand how people are saying that calling her Kamala is the troll. Maybe there's something I missed. I don't know.
Like in the future too, on those trivia game shows, they'll say it's like, is this Trump quote or actual?
Is this a real Trump quote? Yeah. For 300, is this a real Trump quote? And it's going to be like the most insane thing you've ever heard, and you will 100% not know if it's real. You will have no clue if it's real or not. Well, it'll be interesting to see. We'll have to, if we both make it out the other end in 20 years, we can revisit this topic and decide what the result is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But either way, do you feel that we covered the subject? Is there anything else you would want to touch on before we go?
No, I think we covered it well.
All right. Well, this was a good conversation. I hadn't really considered this topic very much previously. Other questions you asked brushed up on things that I had put a lot of thought into.
Mm-hmm.
So this was interesting because I was doing a lot of my thinking in real time. And I really enjoyed it. This was a good topic. Thank you, Mansur. And if you guys watching at home enjoyed it and made it here to the end, thank you for being here. Let us know if you have any thoughts or feelings in the comments, if you're watching this somewhere where you can leave comments. And any last words, Mansur?
Well, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've really been thinking about this mostly because I've thought about social media as a whole in terms of society and how it impacts things. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you enjoyed our better opinion, or mine.
Because ours is the better opinion. I have to fit it in every episode. All right. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.